Welcome to the AI Advantage Pro special event, running the Red Queen's Race with Noah Healy, Part 1. Today we're doing something a little different, which is an extended interview. So Noah, what is it you'd like to talk about today?
Well, first off, thanks for having me back, Richard. And I'd like to talk about basically strategy for deploying AI and how evolutionary theory gives us some insights into what sorts of approaches and expectations we should be thinking about in order to figure out what deployments are going to be valuable or dangerous.
And you're literally going to take us through the looking glass with us.
Absolutely. One of the most important ideas in evolutionary systems is something known as the Red Queen's race. Uh, when Alice gets across the chessboard and encounters the Red Queen, she has a number of impossible adventures, and one of them is a race in which the scenery does not move. And the Queen replies that, of course, here in Looking Glass Land, you must run as fast as you can in order to not move at all.
Now, you see, that's a really interesting metaphor that we've got here, because one of the things, when we first started talking about this off camera, you really set me thinking, how many people even realize they're in this race?
That's one of the major challenges. People have strong linearity biases and strong normality biases. So there's an idea that one, uh, things can only get better as quickly or worse as quickly as they are currently getting better or worse. And two, that whatever happened or sort of represented what happened over the last few days, weeks, years, centuries, has to be basically representative of what all of the future will look like. And that's one of those things that's very hard to sort of get past and realize that um, once the ground starts to shift, it can actually kind of move any speed it feels like. And while normality is much to be desired, it is something that you have to build and maintain and work for, not something that just comes up with the sun.
So what I'm hearing there, though, is that people have fallen into the trap of almost ignoring the race, willful ignorance in the past.
Very much. Computer technology has been increasing its capacity at a hyper exponential rate for longer than virtually everyone on Earth basically has been alive. Um, the sort of earliest computer revolution now goes back to the 40s, 50s region. And there aren't a lot of people who are in their 70s to 80s
Mhm.
anymore. Uh, and there's actually an interesting study that traces the exponential capacity all the way back to the analytic engine and some of the other things from the late 1700s that were being worked on by
Ch-
Countess Lovelace.
Okay, and
So
Charles Babbage, these sorts of things, yeah?
exactly, yeah. So from certain perspectives, this progress, while slow, is been constantly building on itself and going faster and faster and faster. And things like ChatGPT and the various image AI generative systems that are out there uh, seem to be something that sort of has burst onto the field and are moving very quickly. But from the perspective of an ongoing idea and set of breakthroughs that's been worked on since the 50s and are using the momentum and building on the ideas of large numbers of very intelligent people, entire life's work.
Mhm.
Um, the the dam is starting to shift, and that's around the latest time you possibly want to react to it.
So this is absolutely fascinating for me because you and I are in these fields. We see these things happening, but it's everybody else that it seems to creep up on. It's a case of, as you say, people have put their lives working to this. You can look at so many different things. You could say, hey, look at the way that cars came in and took over from the horse. You could say, hey, look at, move forward. The transistor radio came in, and before you know it, it was everywhere, and people were just freaked out about how easy it was to suddenly be carrying around a small radio. Staying in the technology world, flat screen TVs. Now, I remember the days when a flat screen TV was, as much as a car. Then all of a sudden, now you can pick them up at the cheapest stores possible. It's just ridiculous. And there's huge amounts of work that goes into that. So it's not just limited to AI in this example. I mean, what's your take on, there's a classic argument about it takes 20 years for a technology to actually mature to the point where it's commercialized. The view that I've got on this is there's a certain amount of marketing that needs to be injected into a process. What's your take on it as to when it should actually happen? Because ChatGPT has almost happened without marketing. It doesn't seem to have needed anybody formally going out there and saying, hey, we've got this amazing thing. It's just been a tidal wave of, things happening. And it's crazy.
Well, that's one of the things that's a really big deal about communication technology.
Mm-hmm.
And again, while it's very easy to see these things as sort of coming out of nowhere, there's actually an infamous case by film director did Apocalypse Now and The Godfather.
Francis Ford Coppola.
Francis Ford Coppola. So he gave a slightly unhinged speech to the Academy in the 70s
Mm-hmm.
about how important and transcendent the communications revolution was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it only takes a little bit away from that to realize that he was apparently unknowingly tripping on acid at the time. It's quite a story. But even 10 years before that, Marshall McLuhan, and 10 years before that is sort of the end of Marshall McLuhan's work, had been talking about the existence of globalized networks of communication and how that could revolutionize the nature of society. His phrase was, "The medium is the message," and post that, we've seen with Microsoft's insane releases of like Windows 95 and Windows XP, the
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous uptake of the iPhone and the iPod. These information communication cultural technologies spread much faster than wildfire, because they have this trait that getting on board alters your life in ways that you like. And so sort of every customer becomes an evangelist, which is that's like the holy grail for sales and marketing, is that your customer base is your sales team.
It's the
And
ultimate reference selling, isn't it?
precisely, yeah. And so when using your product's side effect is that you're producing those references and sales points, there's completely new ways to think about these things. And with now machines capable of generating information on their own, uh, that that's one of the ways that you need to be thinking about these things. Um, and if you don't, anybody else that does will be able to capture that edge.
That's interesting. As I'm looking at what's happening with AI, and ChatGPT is the one that everybody jumps to, and it's kind of a great starting point. And I think for the zeitgeist of the way that people are interested in AI now, that's been the spark that's lit the fuse. Because honestly, prior to then, we've had lots of AI. There's been plenty of systems out there using AI. This is nothing new in real terms, but it's the way with the large language models and everything else that goes with it, and the accessibility that's been the big change, in my opinion. And also, being realistic, to quote Bill Gates when he first rolled out Internet Explorer in a significant way to take on Netscape, a lot of our listeners may not realize that back in the day, you used to have to pay for your internet browser. You used to have to pay $20 to get, the equivalent of Chrome at the time. And Internet Explorer was free. And I remember him saying on stage, it's priced to sell. the idea that, let's say, the first versions of this are absolutely free and anybody can try it out. I mean, from a communication point of view and from a marketing point of view, that's utterly amazing.
Well, again, and not only that, but there are open source models that are available for tuning and other research purposes that are pretty close to enterprise ready,
Mhm.
more or less right out of the box, that obviously, yes, won't be as tuned up as ChatGPT for general communication, but which you can turn into your own kinds of applications for internal uses, for external uses, for many other things, which are free, in addition to being largely unencumbered. They're also open licensed as well, and so they're systems that you can run on your own or on your cloud.
One of the things that I've always loved that's been quoted about the internet is, the way that this suddenly became a way for people to share ideas, be they good or bad, and that ability to communicate, which has been a fantastic thing for so many people. I think, we can all cite plenty of bad examples on the internet, but there's also so many positives that have come from it as well. There's plenty of those out there. When it comes to the likes of ChatGPT or Llama 2 or any of the other AI tools out there, how do you think this is changing how people are going to just interact in day-to-day life? Because that level of communication jump that we achieved with the internet and the good and the bad that came with it was astonishing. Okay, who doesn't use the internet in some form, whether they realize it or not? When you flip open your phone and look at your bank account, you're using the internet. You may not realize it, but you are, of course. That's just how it works. What do you think are going to be the big changes with AI that people aren't even going to realize that are happening?
Uh, well, there's a lot of sort of under the cover and behind the scene movement that is occurring with that, and we're already starting to see it. ChatGPT's investment from Microsoft and merging with Bing, and then coming back. So uh, one of the things that many people are sort of seamlessly getting introduced to is something that in the early days of the internet, when people had questions, they would just hop onto Google,
Hmm.
or in the really old days, like Yahoo or Alta
Yahoo
Vista.
or Alta, yeah, I was going to say Alta
Yeah,
Vista.
yeah. But
Ask
uh,
Jeeves. Oh, geez, now you make me
Ask
sound old.
Jeeves tried to Ask Jeeves actually tried to lean into what most people were using Google for, which was people would go to Google and they would literally ask a question.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, well-formatted questions don't do particularly better or worse on Google search algorithm, because that's not exactly what they were tuned up for. And it turned out that the because Google had a highly effective search algorithm, the first few entries, usually the first entry, was actually the answer, assuming that it existed. And going back to sharing information, that was a major positive. As Google became less valuable there, we've seen the social media companies like Twitter or Facebook become the place where people ask their sort of personal networks advice
Mhm.
and then receive advice back from those networks. So there's a slightly different kind of curation going on there. Uh, but with these chatbots, what I've seen is a shift back towards asking the chatbots their opinions on things, which actually, to some extent, changes the game in a few different directions. One, it's re-centralizing. So the big bots like Google and Bing are once again sort of the voices of authority. Um, but two, uh, what SEO means is changing. It's less about being able to get your page to the top of the list so that they read your page. It's about getting your semantic ideas into the zeitgeist attached to those questions, because the chatbots are going to regurgitate whatever the top zeitgeist idea is for each of its things. And so the problem for SEO is less the problem of page ranking, and now more the problem of page ranking within the information set that the AIs are using, which is going to be a very, very different kind of thing, and require very, very different strategies to sort of expand out. Um, Content and specific content is going to be a lot more valuable in those contexts, because those are the kinds of things that the chatbots will see as being distinct ideas.
This almost sounds like the chatbots have their own version of Twitter with things trending, or Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it
To,
these
s-
days.
to some extent, so getting into the nitty gritty of how these things actually work, and bearing in mind that um, these are private companies that don't publish the complete, bitwise readouts, and so we can't know precisely and exactly how they work. The published sizes, which are basically plausible, are very, very large, but they're not large enough that the chatbot can, in addition to its information about style and grammar and vocabulary and so on, also have all of Wikipedia and all of the Encyclopedia Britannica
Mhm.
and every blog post ever written also resident within its memory banks. And so the knowledge base of those things is somewhat constrained. And that's one of the big moves that they've been spending a lot of money on, to expand the knowledge base in various ways. One of the ways that they've told us that they're doing this is that they can take these encyclopedia-like articles, run them through the chatbot, and essentially get a very specific vector, essentially a big long list of about 1,000-ish numbers, um, that points to where in that chatbot's sort of memory space this information would live if it was in their space. And so what they can then do is, when a request comes in, they can compute where information relevant to that question would lie in memory space, do a fairly basic mathematical trick to find the articles that are close to that answer, and then take those articles and behind the scenes add them into your question, so that the system basically picks up the cliff notes,
Mhm.
crams for the test, and then gives you the answer all in a few seconds. And so the presence or absence of relevant material in that database, and and how much and how many ways in which your material is present or absent in that database, then becomes very important for how relevant your ideas and business will be to the what's rapidly becoming one of the primary ways people ask questions. So uh, my partner at my podcast, he likes to talk about using ChatGPT. He bought the installment, and he gets it to give him recipes for things. Um, in days past, you might be on Facebook or something and be signed up on a recipe group, or sign up for some food delivery service that will send you the food with the recipe. Or in days before that, if you wanted to know, I've got eggs, tomatoes, oranges, and chicken. What
What
do I
can I
eat?
make? What can I make? Yeah.
Right. I could type that into Google or Bing or any of the other things, and a recipe or two will pop up that'll be as palatable as possible. Um, but he doesn't do those things anymore. He now asks ChatGPT, and so that's that's the movement I see, is that we're going to see sort of social proof shifting over to chatbots, as long as these things can be maintained as authoritative and helpful sources.
And a lot of the theme of what we've talked about today has been the communication. Okay. And one of the things that I think, and one of the reasons I think that some of these technologies have taken off in the way that they have, is that people love to communicate. People love to be able to talk, love to be able to chat to each other. we're on other sides of the planet and we're chatting to each other quite happily, and this is amazing. But it's now just commonplace. The thing that gets me is, or one of the areas I'd like to investigate with you is the personalization of some of these chatbots, because Meta has now started to, add its personalities into the chatbots that it's creating, and there's various others. And even if you just go into ChatGPT and say reply in the style of, or even if you go into common instructions, you can create characters completely from scratch. And you could say, hey, I want you to be a financial consultant in the style of Warren Buffett, but speak with an Australian accent. You could quite happily do that and you would get something back. How do you make sure that people have trust with a service like that? Because we all know that the likes of ChatGPT and any of the other systems, I'm not just focusing on ChatGPT, but they hallucinate.
Well, that's very much the challenge, and of course, the thing is, previous super intelligent systems have all been able to lose the plot threads as well.
Mhm.
Um, uh, Google, if you asked for things that were weird enough, would throw up its hands and just show you some stuff. That's fairly difficult. One of the other fun things that could happen to you on Google, and this actually did happen to me on Gmail. I was having a conversation with a friend about theoretical computer science,
Mhm.
and the sideline ad turned into a pitch to offer me a job. Um,
Okay.
our conversation had become technical and extended enough that the algorithm had decided that I might be the kind of person that should be working for them. That didn't ultimately turn into an actual job offer, but still, those sorts of things can happen. Um, and the stylistic thing, I think, is an important insight because style is most of what ChatGPT has learned how to do.
Mhm.
We actually have had systems that can produce coherent ideas at a high level for quite some time. They're called proof assistants,
Mhm.
and they're really abstract and very hard to sort of think about properly, but they're things that will solve very deep and important mathematical problems in relatively efficient ways. And for the things that sort of require still human inspiration, they will check that the human's inspiration hasn't gone too far off the rails into fantasy land. And so these things have existed for, at this point, decades.
Mhm.
And they are not bursting onto the world, revolutionizing everything and stunning us with their brilliance, because they're just too hard to, they speak strictly and solely in abstract symbols.
But it's that
Whereas,
translation into something that's understandable
well,
for
not just
everybody.
understandable, but that style really speaks to us. So,
Mhm.
for example, one of the top writers of the last century is a guy named P.G. Wodehouse. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with
I
Jeeves
am
and Wooster?
indeed. Yep.
Absolutely. So, and then sort of bridging over the century before the next one, we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Um, so I asked uh, one of these bots to write me a short story where Wooster hires Sherlock Holmes to get his spats back from Jeeves. And
Love it.
it actually turns out that Jeeves has arranged this because Wooster has fallen in with, some kind of spy ring, and getting Holmes in is necessary. And so he's basically manipulated this situation into existence. Um, and I put in a few more details and asked it to sort of tell the story twice, once in a Woodhouseian way,
Mhm.
and then with an explanation from Dr. Watson, of sort of what's actually going on. And it wasn't great. I'm sure with a lot of work, you could actually sort of turn this into something,
Mhm.
uh, but it was very bare bones. It didn't sort of come up with any new turns of phrases. Certainly, the plot was essentially just a recitation of exactly what I just said,
Yeah.
with one or two more curly cues that I had specifically prompted it to put in there. Uh, but the style was decent.
Mm.
The first two paragraphs read more or less like Woodhouse in the voice of Wooster, and the last two paragraphs read more or less like Doyle in the voice of Watson. And so that's a skill. Like, I personally can't write like Dr. John Watson, but there are multiple computer programs that can do that now. And so that stylistic approach is what creates the triggers in our brains that are letting us take these things on board and take heed of them. And that's also what specifically creates the risk of hallucination, because to the extent that this stylistically works for us, just as with charismatic leaders throughout history, many of who've had wildly stupid or occasionally wildly evil ideas, nevertheless, their force of will and their style creates confidence around what they're saying. Um, and so that that risk of sort of getting multiple opinions, say, and having more than one of these kinds of engines in play. Uh, one of the sorts of standard ideas in science fiction, when you have sort of willed machines, or machines that are complex that you can't be really sure about them, is that you have sort of a strategy where you would actually deploy multiple AIs and then have a system sort of analyze uh, to make sure that they're more or less in accordance before you move forward with one or the other messaging, would do wonders towards decreasing the risks of hallucination.
That concludes part 1 of Running the Red Queen's Race. Join us for part 2, where we look to how existing frameworks can be applied for success. Don't forget to sign up for our live November event with Noah at aiadvantage.show under live networking events. See you soon.